Welcome to Dr. Jester Talks, and I'm gonna talk about this. From Phys.org. Hints of life on Venus. Scientists detect phosphine molecules in high cloud decks. Well, if it's the first time you're actually watching an episode of Dr. Jester Talks, this is one of those positive spins or positive news articles that I've decided to separate from Dr. Jester Rants. Anyway, it just came out, the possibility of life on the clouds of Venus. I'm gonna talk about it mostly instead of reading much of the article. Just going to give it the first few paragraphs. I'm gonna read it, then I'm gonna talk about it because they go on a lot of minutiae that I'm going to mention later on in the video. And the possibilities of using some of the part of the stuff that I've learned in my university degree. Holy shit, I'm gonna get use out of it for once, huh? An international team of astronomers led by Professor Jane Greaves of Cardiff University today announced the discovery of a rare molecule, phosphine, in the clouds of Venus. On Earth, this gas is only made industrially or by microbes that thrive in oxygen-free environments. Astronomers have speculated for decades that high clouds on Venus could offer a home for microbes floating free on the scorching surface but still needing to tolerate very high acidity. The detection of the phosphine molecules, which consist of hydrogen and phosphorus, could point to this extraterrestrial aerial life. The new discovery is described in a paper in Nature Astronomy. Detected the phosphine where the wooded millimeter much longer than the human. Okay. I'm gonna go and talk about it because they are going to explain about all the things. One method, it's mostly, well, technically it's pretty much the main method used to discover the components of a planet or a star is to use the light, a known light, which is known elements, to shine it through the gas or the planet in this case, and then collect that information and read the brightness, the color shift of that light, and then read it and then compare it to a known set of elements of that light, or a known set of colors or the grading colors of that light, and then deduce based on that on shift and graphs of what could cause that shift of light or that English, and then use that to predict or understand what could be causing that shift or that color grading on the light. And that's what we call spectrometry or spectrograph. It's what we use in labs as well. For instance, there are multiple ways we can actually use. One of the methods is you converted everything in a liquid and you put it on a machine, and the machine will then shine a laser or a light, etc., and the reader will then capture that light and then show you on a graph or what it is, and then you have to read it. In the university we actually had to without any sort of way trying to identify what element was in that graph. And another method is gas chromatography, is that you convert everything into a gas, etc. Into a liquid, and then you insert it on a syringe on top of the machine. The machine will then vaporize that liquid, it will then become a gas, and then we'll use the same process of the light shining through that gas, and then you show up on a graph, and then you have to deduce the element, etc. It's interesting. It's a method, and it's a method that we use also on planets as well, or on stars. It's how we know what's the chemical component of a planet and other things. One method is the method that we use instead of actually using a machine of going there to the stars or the planet, is to take the known component of a star. We know what the makeup component of the sun is. We know the color, the exact color of its light. We know the spectrum of that light, and then it will when a planet goes in front of it, in this case Venus, part of its atmosphere will then kind of shift. You'll see the light going through the atmosphere, kind of like what we see on the skies, etc., above our home. For instance, part of the reason why the sky is blue is due to the composition of its atmosphere. And that's exactly how we're going to deduce the chemical elements of the Venus clouds. It goes in front of the star, and then the light will shine through the atmosphere, and one of our equipment, in this case a telescope, will then capture that light, and then I'll show in the spectrograph and show the spectrum of that light, what could cause that spectrum or that shift in color from the sun, of the color of the light of the sun into that graph. That's how we do it. And one of the reasons why bacteria could potentially be surviving on the clouds of Venus is because down there it's pretty hellish. I complain that this shithole has a very high temperature, but if I went to Venus that would be like literal hell, because not only is the pressure from the atmosphere so big, much larger than going deeper into our oceans, it's that it has over 400 degrees Celsius or even more in temperature. That's I don't know, way over 1,000 Fahrenheit. Don't quote me on that. It's so hellish and so full of pressure that it's kind of like greenhouse effect going havoc, completely insane. And one of the things that you most note is that Venus is pretty much a dead planet, not because of those hellish temperatures and everything like that. It's because its core, if I believe either it's I don't quite recall correct, I think it's Mars that's still spinning, but very slowly, and Venus core is still spinning, or it's completely stopped. Either way, it's one of the reasons why Venus still has water in its atmosphere and everything in the planet, but very little. Why? Because of the solar winds. It keeps hitting the planet, and since it doesn't have a magnetic core to generate the magnetic shield to protect from its atmosphere or the planet itself from the solar winds, which is very strong. It's one of the techniques we could use to actually power one of our ships, kind of like a solar sail. I'm digressing, ain't I? Let's get back to the main topic. Where was I? Oh yeah, it's definitely destroying the atmosphere of Venus. Soon, probably in a few million years, Venus may end up looking like Mercury, with very to no atmosphere whatsoever. It's completely destroyed, gone, because the wind is definitely driving everything out of that of the planet. Anyway, due to how the surface of Venus is, the possibility of life existing there is very little. So one of the possibilities is that they could thrive and live on its clouds. We have been, as scientists, have been speculating about it for decades now, that life could thrive on the atmosphere, especially because we are basing on it, on everything, on that knowledge, on everything we have here on Earth. That bacteria, it's pretty hardy. They love to live in acidic environments or clouds on everywhere, and life could be very resilient. One of the techniques that this bacteria could use, maybe it's using it as a warding against other bacteria in the atmosphere, and that's one of the reasons why they release phosphine, or its breathing apparatus. I don't know. We would actually have to get samples of that atmosphere and check. Anyway, one of the techniques that the bacteria could use is imitate one of the things that we have here on Earth. I'm gonna tell you something that happened to me back in the university while I was breeding my little million childs, the E. coli. Well, the E. coli sample that we had back in the university in the UK was from the 70s, so it was had countless and countless of generations of living in a lab. So it never actually got exposed to anything, to any enemy, to any predators, to any other immune system or anything like that. So one of the reasons why is that evolution always plays itself. Yeah, always plays a role. So the bacteria didn't have any reason whatsoever to waste resources in creating a shield. Yes, most bacteria have a kind of like a crust or a shield-like structure to protect itself from the environment or from predators and other things like that. It's one of the reasons why, later on I'm going to explain it. And so that's why university-bred bacteria, they don't have that. They don't have to waste energy or resources in creating that. So they are technically pretty weak. And it happened that I was collecting some of the samples, etc., and working on a slide when suddenly my partner was playing around with one of the E. coli samples. It was from a test tube, and he was playing around, and suddenly I felt a few wet spots on my left hand. And that's one way of you getting contaminated with E. coli. But due to the nature of our skin being kind of acidic, in some places salty in others, giggity, and the bacteria could, for instance, if it had that shield, infiltrate through your skin, and you get contaminated, and you get a very nasty batch of diarrhea from the E. coli. Because it would then survive your immune system for quite some time before the immune system would then consume the entire bacteria. But considering that it doesn't have that shield, it pretty much either died due to contact with the environment, due to the air itself, or it died on my skin. And even if it didn't die on my skin, it managed to infiltrate and get in my body, my immune system fought it quite easily, like a normal infection that it already knows how to fight, because it doesn't have that shield, kind of like a crust itself. So one of the reasons why bacteria could survive in that very acidic environment in Venus is due to that shield. It's one of the reasons why one of the projects for my master's that I wanted to do was a reproduction of E. coli, trying to test it, and how could they adapt and develop itself on more hostile environments that would otherwise kill it, and see how far or how many generations I could pump out of it. But then again, shitholes happen and things like that happens, and you end up having to shelve a certain dream and let it rot in the backs of your memory, and then crying yourself to sleep in fetal position because the shithole you live in doesn't allow science to develop. Anyway, let's see what else we have here. Although high clouds of Venus have temperatures of up to a pleasant 30 degrees centigrade, they are incredibly acidic, around 90% sulfuric acid, posing major issues for microbes to survive there. Yes, major issues, but if you have a specific species of microbes or bacteria, they could actually thrive in there. For instance, we have bacteria that thrives in acidic environments like those acidic lakes we see on geysers and other places. In volcanic activities, bacteria who live in volcanic slots or holes itself, or holes, or even in, for instance, even multicellular life thriving in volcanic in volcanoes on the sea. Those temperatures are really high, but they go there and thrive. Bacteria, multicellular, they all thrive in that. One of the reasons why we think life might actually live in Europa, one of the moons in Jupiter. It's due to the gravity of Jupiter pushing and shifting the core of one of its moons, or one of its natural satellites, that will generate the core on the moon, because it keeps moving back and forth and thus generating heat and expelling that as underwater volcanoes. But the life in there could very potentially be completely blind. Anyway, let's see. Oh, another thing, bacteria. We have found bacteria living in goddamn radioactive environments, especially in those places where you insert the rods, radioactive rods on the nuclear core of the nuclear powered engine, nuclear powered plants. It's kind of interesting. Hopefully they end up releasing a probe, create a probe who could then take a sample of the Venus atmosphere and send it back to Earth. Who knows? Hopefully we get to see that in my lifetime, and hopefully one day, if shit doesn't hit the fan again, I could then realize a dream and work in those places, even if it's being just a janitor cleaning up or mopping up the floor and watching all that coming up to in front of a screen somewhere in NASA. I don't know. At least it would be better use of my degree than living this shithole who doesn't appreciate it. Well, thank you for watching. See you in my next video. Good night.